recording, you should see something up in your corner, someplace on your screen that says recording, and the word continue. If you click the word continue, it means you're basically saying, it's okay, I'm here, I understand it's being recorded, and the continue button will go away. And then we will send you a link to that recording on Tuesdays. But please, we ask, only share that link view it with people that paid for a ticket, members of your own household. Don't forward it to other people. If you do have friends who want to take the class starting next week, we will send the link to the past recordings to any new registrants so they can go back and enjoy anything they've missed. And that's my bit.
Great. Several people did write to me on my email address afterwards, and that was great. Again, it's very simple, AD, artistic director, ad@townhalltheater.org. Thanks for all the kind words. A lot of people had nice things to say, and several people wrote with questions. And I just want to start with a question sent by my buddy, Ted Shy. Hello, Ted. He's out there somewhere. And Ted sent an interesting question. He said, those sets for the Ziegfeld Follies were just amazing. How did they happen? Who did that? Well, I knew something about that. A man named Joseph Urban, U-R-B-A-N. Is somebody unmuted, Mary? Are we okay?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on one sec. And now, Doug, you have to unmute just yourself now.
Anyway, a man named Joseph Urban gave Ziegfeld his look, and I knew a little bit about him. I knew he was a famous architect in Europe, and he came over to this country. But I thought, well, before I answer Ted, I'm going to do a little research, and learned quite a bit about Mr. Urban that I think you will enjoy. Let me share my screen here. So this is Joseph Urban, who designed these amazing sets and is famous for it, but he was famous for a lot of other things. He designed palaces in Europe. He also was hired by Ziegfeld. I mean, it's a typical Ziegfeld story of seeing somebody with enormous talent, and Ziegfeld spends a bunch of money and grabs him. This is the second Ziegfeld theater, designed by Joseph Urban himself. This was on 6th Avenue. Some of you might remember this theater. It was torn down in 1966. Just a couple of years before the whole historic preservation movement came along. This is after they tore down Penn Station. Some of you will remember. That would have been a jewel in New York's crown. Apparently a magnificent theater. It was torn down. And of course, he designed sets for the Ziegfeld Follies. They were grand, they were elaborate. Nobody had seen anything like it. I believe those are 2 live lions, by the way, between that woman who's singing. I hadn't realized that he had also designed sets for the Metropolitan Opera. This is a set for the Tales of Hoffmann at the Metropolitan Opera. He was a famous illustrator, but I also didn't realize just how much construction he did, especially in the south of Florida. Is this the set for the Merry Widow? Is this some elegant Ziegfeld set? No, this is, wait for it, Mar-a-Lago. This is Donald Trump's home. Originally designed for Merriweather Post. And this is the house. Trump, to his endless credit, it was a little dilapidated and he has restored it. But somehow it tickles me that there's just one step between the opulence of the Ziegfeld Follies and the opulence of how Donald Trump lives day to day at Mar-a-Lago. Anyway, same designer, a man named Joseph Urban. And I'm now, Ted, thank you for the question. I just love the way that when you start looking into history, it makes interesting connections that you never would have dreamed of. We're going to talk today about the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And the headline today is how the musical theater always reacts very specifically and very quickly to what's happening in our society. So we're starting with the 1920s. And you all probably have a feeling, sort of a vague feeling. I don't think any of you were there, but for the 1920s, which we called the Jazz Age, we called the Roaring 20s. The nation's wealth doubled in that period. We just won the World War. We were a superpower. We had a really good time. And there was jazz and there were parties and it was an exciting time. But the real story.
I'm not seeing anything with that picture. I'm not seeing you at all.
Are you all seeing? No, that's fine.
Okay.
Are you seeing me, Mary? Yeah. Okay, I'm good.
Yes, I'm seeing you.
I'm good. All right. Great. So, but the real story of the 1920s, and one that maybe you hadn't realized, was the new woman of the 1920s. How it's really the first wave of feminism. You might say that women were liberated, but liberated suggests that somebody is liberating you. They liberated themselves. There were all kinds of thou shalt nots about being a woman in the early part of the century, how you had to dress, how you had to be demure, how you only spoke when you were spoken to. And suddenly we have this whole new generation of women who take charge of their lives and say, we're going to do what we want to do. For example, this is how their mothers dressed, roughly 1910, 1915. Overnight, by 1920, women are dressing like this. It is a seismic change. Go back again. There's mom, and her daughter comes out of her bedroom one day, and she's dressed like that. She's showing skin, she's showing arms, she's showing legs, and she's doing a whole bunch of things that women never dared do before. One of the things she does, she cuts off her hair. I'm going to dress comfortably. And I'm not going to spend an hour putting my hair up every day. And I'm not going to spend time taking it down at night. I'm going to live comfortably. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to live sort of an efficient, fun life. And so this is the bob that everyone suddenly was wearing in the 1920s. She does a couple of other things. She starts smoking in public, which was never done. She starts drinking in public, which was never done. She starts going to clubs at night and elaborate parties. And one of the things she does is she starts dancing. And the 20s are dance crazy. And she's dancing in these little outfits and drinking and smoking and carrying on and having, her mother was appalled. Her grandmother did not recognize her granddaughter. But this is what happens in the 1920s. And I talked a lot about dance. This is why we call these people, the name is flappers. We call it flapper culture because they did so much dancing. And there were new dances every week. There was the Lindy Hop, which became the Jitterbug, the Foxtrot, the Kangaroo Hop, the Chicken Scratch, the Turkey Trot, the Black Bottom, the Charleston, the Texas Tommy. Every review on Broadway would have to have a new dance. And this is the great era of social dancing. Even on a Monday night, we're going to go out dancing, drinking, and having a good time. We have, there's something about the frankness, the spunk, the energy of this new woman that really becomes the national story. It's what everybody wants to talk about. And so the musical picks that up. And starting in 1920, we've got this barrage of musicals. The titles are simply a woman's name, as if to advertise, yeah, we want to talk about this new woman. And so let me just give you some titles starting in 1920. Sybil, Suzette, Hermione, Liza. I will remind you, usually the man's name was in the title, but not in the 1920s. Betty Be Good. I love that title. Do you think Betty's going to be good? No, Betty's not going to be good. And we're going to delight in seeing her shenanigans. Little Miss Charity, Lady Billy, The Rose Girl, The Right Girl, Phoebe of Quality Street. It seems like the only thing on Broadway was this spunky new American woman. Molly Darling, Little Nellie Kelly, Elsie, Adrian, Poppy, The Rise of Rosie O'Reilly, The Chiffon Girl, Lady Be Good by Gershwin, Rosemarie by Frimmel, No, No, Nanette. I love that title. No, no, Nanette, don't do that. Don't do what you shouldn't do. We just know that Nanette's going to do it and she's going to come out of it all unscathed. The three most famous musicals about the new woman in the 20s were titled Sally, Irene, and Mary. Once or twice, you'll see one of those revived as kind of a period piece. Sally, Irene, and Mary. And one very clever person wrote a musical called Sally, Irene, and Mary, just to cash in on the popularity of the other three. It's as if I were to write a musical today called Madonna, J-Lo, and Cher, you know, even though they're not in my musical and it doesn't matter, maybe that will help me sell some tickets. The It Girl, well, we've got, I believe, Mary, we've got a little clip here just showing this new American woman and how it was a seismic change in American society. Also, I think there's one nice, very quick clip where you have all their mothers in their dress, and out from behind them stand the daughters, how they're dressing today. And you can just see that the rate of change in this period is extraordinary. Go ahead, Mary.
A time when the rules and the language are being questioned and rewritten is going to be a golden age of musical comedy.
It's a time of liberated sensibilities, a feeling that life is full of youth and vigor, and the music of the 1920s, jazz, really calls the beat of a new age. And the songs that are coming out of Broadway really are registering this kind of shift in the American sensibility.
If it's naughty to rouge your lips, shake your shoulders and twist your hips. Let a lady confess I wanna be bad. If it's naughty to vamp the men, sleep each morning till after 10, then the answer is yes, I wanna be bad. This thing of being a goody is all very well. What can you do if you're loaded with plenty of health and vigor? When you're learning the lips are for, if it's naughty to ask for more, let a lady confess I wanna be bad.
New York theater, particularly musical comedy, is really about the pace of change. And nothing was changing as fast as the American woman. Look at what the woman was wearing in 1914 and what she's wearing in 1922. Her hair's gone, her skirts are short. Her hips have disappeared. Her back is in view. She's smoking, she's drinking. She's kind of trashed the past en route to the party at the speakeasy. And what would attract theater and musical comedy more than something changing that fast?
Delightful. The it girl of the period, the woman who whose personality really captured the zeitgeist, was a woman named Marilyn Miller. Let's see if I got Marilyn here somewhere. Yeah, just a second. This is Marilyn Miller. And it's really a wonderful story. And it's another, it seems like whenever we're talking about the 20s, well, you keep coming back to Florence Ziegfeld and his eye for talent, the way he knew that Sandow, that muscular man, was going to sell, and he knew that his first wife, Anna Held, with the 16-inch waist, was going to sell. He sees this woman, Marilyn Miller, in The Passing Show in 1917, and he immediately senses there's something here that audiences are going to love. So he buys her, he hires her, he gives her acting lessons, he gives her ballet lessons, he gives her tap dance lessons, he gives her elocution lessons, he gives her acting lessons. And then he features her in The Follies of 1918, and she's an overnight smash, and features her in several follies since then. Now, one thing that's interesting, she's not a very good singer. She's not a very good dancer. It's her personality that reaches to the back row of the balcony. And I'm getting a little echo, Mary.
Yeah, trying to shut it off.
Thank you. Good. So anyway, there is a whole sort of little crew of people who became major musical theater stars who could not sing very well or dance very well, but who had amazing personalities that people wanted to see. I think of Zero Mostel as one of those people. Not a very good singer, couldn't dance. He becomes in Fiddler on the Roof and elsewhere a major star. Probably the number one star I can think of like that, who's just sheer personality, is a woman named Carol Channing. Did you all know Carol Channing? Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. She couldn't sing. She couldn't act. She was always Carol Channing. She went to Bennington College, by the way, here in Vermont. But she had a megawatt personality that people just loved. That's sometimes enough in the American, it's sometimes plenty in the American musical theater. So she was the personality of the day. I also marvel sometimes how people can be household words in one decade and be completely forgotten in another. Burt Williams certainly was one of those. Marilyn Miller is another one of those. Of course, their problem is that they didn't last until film. You know, if you're Gene Kelly, you're on Broadway. If you make it into film, or Fred Astaire, you are immortal. But in theater, theater is very ephemeral. When the curtain rings down, it's over, and we've got nothing but memories. We do have a little of her on film. There was one film made during the early talkies. It was of Sally, music by Jerome Kern. Ziegfeld created this show just for her. Let's take a look at her and Sally and see if we can figure out what made her work so well for the American public.
Born in Evansville, Indiana in 1898, Miller was raised in showbiz, billed as Mademoiselle Sugarlump in her parents' vaudeville act. As a teenager, she danced in the Schubert's Passing Show revues. And in 1918, she made it to the top when Ziegfeld featured her in his legendary Follies.
She does her hair all wrong. She isn't costumed properly. She has a sweet voice, but not much of it. And I've seen better dancing. But a delightful thing happens when she comes on stage. Billy Burke Ziegfeld.
In 1920, Florence Ziegfeld showcased his all-American Cinderella in a new show with music by Jerome Kern. By the time the curtain fell on Sally, their spunky heroine had become a Follies star, just as Marilyn Miller had in real life.
Every star on Broadway is a testament to pluck and luck and achievement and all the values that come with the package of the American dream.
Just think, tomorrow night I'm going to get a chance to dance in front of a real audience.
Our culture is a cultural optimism, and what the musical sells is optimism.
Sure, I'm glad.
Your dreams came true on Broadway. You go to a Broadway show and your dreams came true. You go back to Williamsburg or Brownsville or the Bronx and your dreams don't come true.
A heart full of joy and gladness will always face sadness and strife. So is this heart a silver lining, and try to find the sunny side of life. There now. Don't you feel better?
Sally captured the willful optimism of the age. And Marilyn Miller became living proof that Broadway could turn a dancing Cinderella from Indiana into a national star.
I get it. I hope you get it too, that she somehow captured the spirit of the age. She trashed those flowers in that hotel. Did you see that? She took a very expensive and she threw it at people, but she does it in such a sweet, she breaks the rules, but in such a sweet, good-natured way that you just have to love Marilyn Miller. I have a feeling it's the first time you've ever heard of her. She was one of the greatest stars of the American musical theater stage, and has sort of drifted back into well, she's just, in the midst of time, but it's delightful to know her and that she was really embodied the whole Roaring 20s. I'm going to now talk about two different songwriting teams from this period. The first being Richard Rodgers and Lawrence Hart, or as we generally know them, Rodgers and Hart. And I'm going to talk mostly about Hart, the lyricist. He's the first really top American lyricist to get top billing. He brings a wit and sophistication to lyric writing that we hadn't seen before, but he was a very sad man And this is a very sad story, the story of Lawrence Hart. He is 4'8" tall. He's a freak. His head is too big for his body. He is gay. He is always chasing after some man. He is always obsessed with somebody. And of course, it doesn't turn out well for him because he's just such an odd figure. He descends into alcoholism. He drinks too much. And he introduces a new kind of song to the American stage. And we could, I think, use the word fatalism when it comes to the love song. Love songs prior to this, especially in operetta, was that love was the greatest thing in the world. Ah, sweet mystery of life, at last I found thee. Love is such a wonderful thing. In the hands of Lawrence Hart, love is a ball of problems. Love is going to disappoint you more than not. We live in a state of being heartbroken more than in a state of actually being joyously in love. This is a very adult sentiment. And a very accurate one in a way. I'm told that 50% of all marriages in this country end in divorce. There are a lot of heartbroken people running around there. I also read just recently that if it's your third marriage, you have a 78% chance of divorce. So if any of you are on your third marriage, be very careful, be very, very careful. But he writes about the heartbroken among us. If you've just parted with somebody you thought was the love of your life, you don't want to hear, ah, sweet mystery of life, at last I found you. You want to hear a song like falling in love with love is falling for make-believe, which is one of his favorite lyrics. It never entered my mind, a lyric by Lawrence Hart. We broke up, but it was the perfect relationship. We broke up. It never entered my mind. These are very sophisticated, grown-up thoughts and ideas in his songs. You Took Advantage of Me, another song of his. All kind of a slightly caustic, honest look at relationships, all to these wonderful, lovely melodies of a young Richard Rodgers. I'm going to do a song I think is sort of ideal Richard. I'm not going to do it. Don't worry. I'm not going to do it. But Audra McDonald is going to do it for you right now. A song that I think of as being an ideal song to get a feeling for the lyrics of Lawrence Hart. It's called Spring is Here. It's a standard. Many of you know it. If this is an operetta and the song is Spring is Here, you've got farm girls throwing rose petals around, and we're admiring the leaves on the trees and the sunset and all of that, and love would be a great thing. In Lawrence Hart's mind, spring can have a very negative effect if you've just been disappointed in love. So here is the great, I think the major star of the current Broadway, Audra McDonald. She's won, I don't know how many Emmy, Tony Awards, 5, 6, 7, something like that. Anyway, I'm going to let her sing for you this song, Spring is Here, by Rodgers and Hart.
So just a quick question. We're cutting the Hart-Rodgers interview.
We'll come back to it. Thank you.
Okay.
Once there was a thing called spring, when the world was writing verses like yours and mine. All the lads and girls would sing when we sat at little tables and drank May wine. Now April, May, and June are slightly out of tune. Life has stuck a pin in the balloon. Spring is here. Why doesn't my heart go dancing? Spring is here. Why isn't the waltz entrancing? No desire here.
Isn't she extraordinary? And it's an extraordinary song. Let me make a point about that song. You can act that song. There are complex emotions. As an actor, there's something you can sink your teeth into and perform. Songs from operettas say, "Oh, sweet mystery of life, at last I found you." You basically have to strike a heroic pose and just sing. There's nothing you can really relate to as a human being in these flowery romantic lyrics. They're just kind of you sing. Or if you're singing the desert song like Gordon McRae, look at the sunset and just, park and bark, as we say. But here, there's a lyric you can relate to. Young singers often say to me, "What should I use for an audition piece?" And I always say, a song by Rodgers and Hart. Because you're going to come in and you're not just going to sing a song, you're going to act a song. You have to, because he gives you so many complex grown-up emotions to sing. I had forgotten that I have a picture of Rodgers and Hart. Whenever you see a picture of Rodgers and Hart, Rodgers is always seated because Hart was so sensitive about his height. And there happens to be a little bit of film. It was some sort of 10-minute trailer or something that was made, movie tone something or other for film. And we actually get to see the two of them talking briefly. Mary, are you ready for that? Very good, thank you. So here's Rodgers and Hart in an interview.
Mr. Morley. This is Miss Merrill, the feature writer of the United Syndicate. Mr. Hart?
How do you do?
Mr. Rodgers?
How do you do?
She'd like to do a story with you.
Gentlemen, you're about to be interviewed.
Where till I fix my tie?
Don't you like being interviewed?
Well, I don't mind, as long as you don't ask us which we write first, the words or the music.
I'm not going to ask you that. I think our readers will be more interested in knowing how you get the idea.
You tell her, Larry.
Oh, no, you tell her, Dick.
So there's Lawrence Hart. They had an amazing career. He's a brilliant lyricist. He's, again, the first American, we talked about how when we got to Gilbert and Sullivan, W.S. Gilbert was the first lyricist to get top billing. Same thing with Lawrence Hart. You went to see a Rodgers and Hart show. And one of the real reasons you went to see it is because the lyrics were so witty and charming and interesting and complex. They interpolated their first song into a Broadway show very early. Hart was 24 and Richard Rodgers was 17 years old. Again, I like to make the point that nothing was carved in stone when a Broadway musical opened before Showboat. It could be a show that had run for 3 months. They'd take some songs out, they'd put new songs in. They didn't have to necessarily tell the story. Remember, I talked about how Al Jolson walked across the street and heard George Gershwin's Swanee, immediately put it into his own show. So they managed, this very young songwriting team, to get a song put into a musical called A Lonely Romeo. And I think it had one of the greatest lyrics of all time, which I will read for you. This is a song called Any Old Place with You. And the lyric is, I'd go to hell for you or Philadelphia. Genius, right? Absolute genius. And this is a very young Lawrence Hart writing this very clever lyric. They go on to write their first hit show, which was a revue called The Garrick Gaieties of 1925. It had the famous song Manhattan. I'll take Manhattan, the Bronx and Staten Island too. Typical kind of Lawrence Hart thinking. It's got a Richard Rodgers treats it like a love song. Ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da. Hart celebrates New York by taking you to all of the crummiest places in New York. And that's the joke of the song. I wonder what street compares with Mott Street in July. Well, Mott Street in July, especially back then, you had to hold your nose walking down it. That's the joke of the song. But again, intense cleverness, lyrics that make us laugh. Get this statistic. In 1927, Rogers and Hart have 4 shows playing on Broadway. 4 shows playing on Broadway. Rogers is 25 years old. Lawrence Hart is 32. They make that kind of splash. Nobody's writing stuff like them. Here's a song called You Took Advantage of Me. I just want to read the lyric. Again, the kind of fatalism, the kind of always disappointed in love kind of lyric that we see from him. I'm a sentimental sap, that's all. What's the use in trying not to fall? I have no will, you made your kill because you took advantage of me. I'm so hot and bothered that I don't know my elbow from my ear. I suffer something awful each time you go, and much worse when you're near. What an interesting thought. Have you ever known anybody like that? I suffer something awful each time you go, but much worse when I'm standing right next to you. And I know it's not going anywhere. Typical kind of thought that Lawrence Hart is writing for the stage. Brilliant score for a musical called Babes in Arms. It has the songs Where or When, I Wish I Were in Love Again, and the indelible My Funny Valentine, which is in that show. It's the silliest show ever. And of course, you see this coming. All of the shows are so silly, they're not revived. We rarely revive. There's only one, and I'll talk about it, that we revive a Rogers and Hart show. They're just too silly. However, he contributed 40, 50 songs to the American Songbook that we still sing to this day, that people put on their albums, that people record, that Audra McDonald sings at a Pops concert because they are such remarkable songs. The one, let's see, I gotta get, let me share a screen again. The one musical that they wrote, and they wrote it late, 1940, is Pal Joey. You might know the musical Pal Joey. It too was rather seismic when it hit Broadway, because the central character, Joey, is the most dislikable character you would ever find in a Broadway show. He's handsome. He's played by Gene Kelly. He runs a club. He flirts with and, sleeps with all the women. An older woman falls in love with him. He leads her on, gets what he wants out of her, and then discards her. And by the end of the show, he's discarded every woman he's been with. And in the final frame of the show, he's running after yet another woman. This is where we get the song Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered. The older woman, she's so in love with, like Lawrence Hart was infatuated with certain men. She's infatuated with this young man. She knows it cannot last. And yet she feels she's just so caught up in it. And you get lyrics like, fairly dirty lyrics for Broadway. Couldn't sleep and wouldn't sleep until I could sleep where I shouldn't sleep. Bewitched, bothered, and bewildered. That lyric was changed after the show left Broadway. America was not ready for that lyric. And this lyric that I find funny. When he talks, he is seeking words to get off his chest. Horizontally speaking, he's at his very best. It's kind of a funny lyric, but it's a dirty lyric. Lawrence Hart always pushing the edges and pushing the boundaries. From Pal Joey, which was actually quite a good hit for them. However, I'm going to tell the end of the story, and it's a sad end. He really descends into alcoholism. And in the spring of 1942, the Theater Guild comes to Richard Rogers and says, we've got an idea for a musical. We're going to call it Oklahoma. And they thought they were going to get a Rogers and Hart score. It would have been a very different musical had it been written by Lawrence Hart. Lawrence Hart says, no, I want nothing to do with it. I need a rest. I'm going to Mexico. Rogers says, you're going to Mexico to drink yourself to death, aren't you? He says, no, I need a rest. No, he says, no, you've got to stay. He says to Hart, if you walk out now and walk out on this show, I'm going to find somebody else to write it. And Hart says, who could you find? And Richard Rogers, off the top of his head, says, Oscar Hammerstein. And Hart says, okay, fine, he'd be great. Hart goes to Mexico, nearly drinks himself to death. It is so bad that when he comes back to Penn Station, back to New York City, he has to be carried off the train on a stretcher. Rogers, always the dear friend of this man, they worked together for decades, puts together a revival of an earlier show that they wrote called A Connecticut Yankee, just to give Hart something to do. On opening night, Hart wanders out of the theater, is found in a gutter, and 5 days later, he's dead. It's a very sad story of Lorenz Hart. And yet he's left us rubies in these songs. And also inadvertently, it's the creation of the team of Oscar and Hammerstein, because Hart did not want to talk about Oklahoma, which we will talk about a little later in the day. Okay, what time is it? Okay, great. I also want to talk about somebody else who's writing at that time, somebody I think you know, Cole Porter. Cole Porter is exactly the opposite of Lorenz Hart. He is, and I'm going to use a contemporary term, sex positive. Let's have fun. Let's have sex. Let's have parties. Let's play. Let's have a marvelous, crazy, wonderful time. And so he writes songs in which, well, they're sexy, but they're so innocent and funny that you don't mind. We're all alone, no chaperone can get our number. The world's in slumber, let's misbehave. There's something wild about you, child, that's so contagious. Let's be outrageous, let's misbehave. And the final verse goes, they say that bears have love affairs and even camels. We're merely mammals. Let's misbehave. What a fun lyric. Let's misbehave. He is born incredibly wealthy. And he was born to the richest family in Peru, Indiana. Spends his much of his youth in Paris, where he threw outrageous parties. Money was no object. He joins the French Foreign Legion. You can't make this stuff up, because he wanted to see Northern Africa. And so he's in the French Foreign Legion. He can't do anything. He can't shoot a gun. So he has a piano made. He's very rich. It's a great piano that he carries on his back through Algeria and Tunisia. And at the end of the day, when they get back to their tents or whatever, he'd sit down, play music, write songs, and entertain the troops. He did that for a while because it was fun. Cole Porter didn't do anything that wasn't fun. And then he comes back to the States and has his career on Broadway. So we just played Let's Misbehave. Here's a song you probably know. Birds do it, bees do it, even educated fleas do it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love. You think he's going to say something else, but let's do it. Let's fall in love. Let's have fun. Now, he's a real outsider in a lot of ways when it comes to being a Broadway composer. Most of them started out dirt poor. Most of them started out on the Lower East Side. He never had that problem. But there's one other thing that sets him apart, and I'm not going to go into this too deeply right now, but he wasn't Jewish. And I don't know if you've noticed, but good 95% of the people we have talked about so far have been Jewish. We're Jewish. And to this day, a surprising percentage of people working in the American musical theater were Jewish. A lot of people have tried to figure out why that is. Certainly there's something about the chutzpah, if I can use that word, among Jewish people. Also that there's a great deal of musicality in their liturgies, in which the cantor is as important as the rabbi. Great deal of music in their Eastern European heritage, whatever. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, but let me just give you a list. Irving Berlin, Jerome Kern, these people are all Jewish. Lorenz Hart, Richard Rogers, Harold Arlen, Kurt Weill, Sheldon Harnack, Jerry Bach, Leonard Bernstein, Stephen Sondheim, Stephen Schwartz, Julie Stein, all of the great writing teams, Rogers and Hart, Rogers and Hammerstein, George and Ira Gershwin, Lerner and Lowe, Comden and Green, Kander and Ebb, Adler and Ross. I'm not saying this, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, to be racist about it. I'm not being racist at all. It is a phenomenon. It is an amazing, phenomenal fact about the American musical theater that it really grows as much out of Jewish culture as anything else. And you can actually hit, if you want to do a musicological study, you can hear a lot of klezmer and Jewish influence in a lot of Broadway music. And so I talked earlier on about Broadway music being sort of a mashup of African-American music and European music, and then let's throw into that melting pot Jewish music and klezmer music, and that's also a very important ingredient of the Broadway sound. He goes to Yale, and when he's at Yale, he writes songs that are still sung to this day. He wrote them as an undergraduate, but the Bulldog song and the song Bingo Eli Yale, I think that's a song that is sung to this day at football games. He wrote those as a kid. The one musical, and again, once again, writing a lot of musicals early on where the books are not very interesting. The songs are fun and funny, but they seem very old fashioned and they are not revived. The one exception is a show called Anything Goes, written in 1934. Talk about a typical let's just have fun lyric. In olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked on as something shocking. Now heaven knows anything goes. Good authors too, who once knew better words, now only use four-letter words, writing prose. Anything goes. If driving, I gotta sing this slowly because there's a lot of words. If driving fast cars you like, or low bars you like, or old hymns you like, or bare limbs you like, or Mae West you like, or me undressed you like, nobody would oppose. So though I'm not a great romancer, I know that you're bound to answer when I propose. Anything goes. Anything goes. Now I have to share with you the most successful moment I ever had as a college professor. The moment I realized I was changing lives. I first taught this course back in the 80s. Yes, I'm that old, unbelievable, I know, but I first taught it back in the 80s as a winter term course at Middlebury College. And it just so happened that I had the entire women's hockey team in the class. It was winter term. They wanted to play a lot of hockey. They didn't want anything too demanding. They thought the course would be easy. And so they all took my class. They turned out to be delightful young women, and I really enjoyed them, and they got into it. But they came up to me one day before class, all excited, and they said, Professor Anderson, something amazing happened at practice yesterday. I'm like, really? What happened? And I'm like, well, we were doing this exercise in which the coach threw a puck into the corner, and two people have to go in there, and somebody has to come out with that puck. And the coach says, I'm going to throw the puck into the corner, and anything goes. And the whole hockey team went, Cole Porter, and fell over laughing. Yes, I have changed lives. In a very important way, and they will never forget that moment. And believe me, I will never. I wish I had been there for that moment.
As high as this goes up, but on some reason the sound didn't flip over. Okay. You know why? Why? I think because with Zoom,
we've got somebody that hasn't been. Anyway. Okay, good. Let's continue. Very successful show. It has a strange plot. It takes place on a boat, and it's a crazy plot. I don't think I can recount it for you. But one of the reasons why it's crazy is that it was originally about a bunch of people on a boat, and there are gangsters and other stock characters on this boat. But the boat sinks, and hilarity ensues when this boat goes down, and all these people have to rescue themselves. Well, several weeks before it opened, the SS Morro Castle actually sank. It was like the Titanic going down. 136 people died. It was a national tragedy. And these people have a musical which is about to open in which the boat sinks. And they realize we cannot go on with the boat sinking. So hastily, overnight in hotel rooms, they had to rewrite the plot of Anything Goes to make sure that boat doesn't go down. So now the plot at the end hinges on somebody tells somebody the boat's going down in order to play a fast one on them. And again, hilarity ensues. This is important because it introduced to us someone named Ethel Merman. Some of you might remember Ethel Merman. She was still on television in the 70s and the 80s. She was the biggest star of the period. She introduced so many amazing songs. I Got Rhythm, I Get a Kick Out of You, There's No Business Like Show Business, Everything's Coming Up Roses. People loved her. Songwriters loved her because she introduced a new kind of singing to the Broadway stage, what we can now call the belt. We've been hearing a lot of sort of Marilyn Miller sings in what we might call a legit voice, that high, sort of classically trained voice. Merman has zero training. She just has the loudest voice in creation, and she just belts out these songs. It's not very subtle voice, not a very supple voice. She just sings loud, and she has perfect diction, and you can hear every single word she sings in the back row of the balcony. Recall, there are no microphones in those days. You've got to be able to sing over an orchestra, and she could do it. When Toscanini heard Ethel Merman sing, he said, "Hers is not a human voice. It's another instrument in the band." When Pavarotti heard her, he said, "Ethel Merman's voice is remarkable. It's all one register. She has no passaggio to worry about. She never has to shift gears." And when somebody said that to Merman, he said, "I don't know what he's talking about. I have no idea what he's talking about. Don't ask me. I just open my mouth and I sing." And a favorite quote of mine is the opera singer Grace Moore once said to Ethel Merman, "Your diction is perfect. Your projection effortless. You break all the rules of nature. Not once tonight did I see you breathe from your chest or your abdomen. What do you breathe from?" And Merman said, "Necessity." Absolutely no training. She comes out of Astoria, Queens, born in 1908. And she is a star, and you can see why. She is unique, a unique person in the American musical theater. And I think we've got her doing some "You're the Top" from Anything Goes. Mary, that's a clip we have.
Top, you're Mahatma Gandhi, you're the top, you're Napoleon Brandy, you're the purple light of a summer night in Spain, you're the National Gallery, you're Gobbo's salary, you're cellophane, you're a knight in the streets of Cairo, you're a flight in an auto gyro. I'm the lazy hound that hangs around the shop. But a baby on the bottom, you're the top.
If I were looking for one show to represent the 1930s, it would be Anything Goes. Book by Lindsay and Krauss, songs by Cole Porter, starring Ethel Merman, William Gaxton, Victor Moore, and an incredible Porter score. You're the Top tells people in 1934, yeah, we're all feeling lousy, but now maybe it's time to feel a little better. And we sort of think about the show and that song as a sort of civilized embodiment of the Roosevelt recovery.
But a baby on the bottom, you're the top.
All right. Never mind. Forget it.
I do.
Well, you don't seem to.
I do.
Great. Am I on? Great. Thank you. You're having a little trouble with somebody not being muted there, but great. We'll move on.
Yeah, I just muted somebody who joined us late, and I'll just mention for anybody else who joined us late, we are asking all the participants to please stay muted. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Okay, I hope you get what made if Marilyn Miller is the it girl of the 20s, Merman is the it girl of the 1930s and the 1940s and into the 1950s. I want to talk a little bit about the lyric of that song, which is Cole Porter songs are often what we call list songs. He said, "You're the top," and then he just finds as many examples as he can find of things that are the top. And what's delightful about that song is that he mixes high culture and low culture. So we have Mahatma Gandhi and we have cellophane. You know, cellophane having just been invented. That's the coolest thing on the planet, right? But Gandhi, he's great too. And it just goes on and on and on. How many wonderful things, you know, from, you know, brandy to any number of things, the Louvre Museum, a Bendel bonnet, a Shakespeare sonnet. The craft of writing that kind of lyric with its rhymes, its emphases in certain places, is very, very difficult. So I always made a challenge to my students, which you may or may not want to take up. You're the Top has 4 verses. And part of the fun of a Cole Porter song is that, can he keep it up? Can he keep delighting us with all of these examples of things that are the top? So I say to my students, I say, okay, there are 4 verses of You're the Top. I want you to write the 5th. from your own experience, from what's happening today, right? What is the coolest thing you know? High culture, low culture, medium culture, Middlebury experience, whatever. But can you, in fact, somehow learn the craft of writing a song like this? Now, nobody has to do this, but my students love this exercise and they've come up with, amazing things. You're the top, you're a Lamborghini. You're the top, you're a string bikini. It's really fun to put these things side by side. So you all are going to be sent this lyric writing challenge. Don't do it if you don't want to, but if you're sitting there having your coffee and you've got a pencil, see if you can write the next verse of the song. It will teach you just how difficult this is. People like Lawrence Hart and Cole Porter make it seem so very easy. It's not. So you're going to get a piece of paper like this if you choose to open the attachment Mary sends out tomorrow. And here's a verse of You're the Top. The number is the number of syllables in the line. You're the top, 3. You're the Colosseum, 6. There has to be precisely that number of syllables in that line. I also give you the rhyme scheme. Colosseum, B, rhymes with museum, B. And I put an asterisk there because it's a double rhyme. Seum, Colosseum, Louvre Museum. You get a line like, you're a melody from a symphony by Strauss. There's interior rhyme in that line. Melodie, symphony by Strauss, which ends up rhyming with Mickey Mouse. It's a puzzle. Stephen Sondheim talks so much about how lyric writing is a puzzle. If anybody wants to do this, even if you only get 2 lines of it or 4 lines of it, or can write this entire stanza from your own point of view with your own wit, I certainly recommend it. And send it to me at ad@Town Hall Theater. And the best 1 or 2 or 3, I will immortalize by reading it aloud in the next class. Okay. Craft writing, lyric writing is a craft and probably one of the most difficult things to do on Broadway. And we're dealing with two geniuses, I think, at it right now. The song, the show of his, well, again, generally speaking, the Cole Porter musicals are like Can in 1953. The book is not very good, not very convincing. They seem very old fashioned. But one we do is called Kiss Me Kate. Kiss Me Kate works because he had a terrific book and a terrific play called Taming of the Shrew by Shakespeare. And it is a musical about a troupe of actors putting on Taming of the Shrew. But the complications and problems and stress between the acting company sort of mirrors what's happening in Shakespeare's play. It's got a wonderful, wonderful cast. Song, another opening, another show, Too Darn Hot, Brush Up Your Shakespeare, a wonderful list song playing on Shakespeare titles. Where's the life of late I led? Why can't you behave? And always true to you in my fashion. Wonderful songs in this show. Starred originally Alfred Drake and Patricia Morrison. I was going, and we don't have time, but there was revival. This is revived often on Broadway. There was revival in 1999, I believe. And I have a clip for you, which we'll send you tomorrow. It's just too long, but it's a wonderful version of Too Darn Hot. It's about a bunch of the actors at intermission. They're out in the alley and it's just too hot to do anything. And it turns into this joyous dance number. And so when Mary sends you the links tomorrow, I highly recommend going straight to Too Darn Hot. It's a typical Cole Porter lyric, kind of suggestive, but innocent and fun. Lyrics like, I'd like to sup with my baby tonight, refill my cup with the baby tonight, but I ain't up to my baby tonight because it's too darn hot. We know what he's talking about. I'd like to coo with my baby tonight and pitch the woo with my baby tonight, but pillow, you be my baby tonight because it's too darn hot. And it goes along in that way. It is a delightful number and I highly recommend it. The only sad thing about Cole Porter's life, and there was only one thing, is that he lost a leg in a accident with a horse, riding a horse, somewhere I think in the early 50s. And so was in a wheelchair or walked on a cane, but it never damped his enthusiasm and his joy for life. And he's one of the great characters of the American musical. It is 7:58. I would like a glass of wine. I think this is a great place before we move on to the 1930s to take a moment, go to the bathroom, get a drink, and I'm going to meet you in 5 minutes, no longer. Thank you, everybody. You're doing great. Thank you so much.
You just want to leave that out? Oh, there you are. If anybody has a question or an issue at this point, do feel free to unmute yourself and ask me. And it will be Lisa Mitchell sending that email tomorrow with the links. It won't come from me, it will come from Lisa. Hi, Scott Morrison, by the way. For some reason, you keep showing up right not under me on my screen, which makes me very happy to see you there.
I thought it was just because it was my computer that I was up there. It must be because I'm so important.
It must be. It's obviously in order of importance.
I've been singing along with Doug. It's a good thing you can't hear me.
I know. I noticed that actually, mouthing the words to Anything Goes in particular. I love that. I love that song. You know, when I was a kid, my mother used to talk about what I thought she was saying was Vic d'amour for some reason, like D''AMOUR. And I was sure that's who she meant. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized it was Victor Moore.
Well, this all brings back memories for me, I have to say.
Well, me too. I took my daughter and I took this class when Doug did it at the middle school band room. And back then he did have some live people come in, you know, some singers come in and sing. Debbie sang and a couple of other people sang, and it was great. But I think he played some cassette tapes. Maybe there were no visuals. There was like a handout you got with some pictures and stuff. But now with the technology, well, when we did it in the theater 2 years ago, it was great too. To have everything on the big screen at the theater, which hopefully, well, next time we do it, that'll be the way it is.
Well, let me know the next time he does it, because I want to come back.
Yeah. It's really fun in the theater to do it. And like last year we had, you know, Kathy Walsh came and sang, and Josh Collier came and sang a few things. And that, you know, the mix of that with the videos and the photos and stuff on the big screen was pretty great. But we actually, if we were in the theater, we would be sold out, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
So
it's funny. It's Too Darn Hot is what's on the big screen for me.
That's right. That's because that's what Doug put that slide up to remind everybody that when you get the links tomorrow to the YouTube, you should definitely watch it. It's a particularly good, the Broadway revival in '99 was very good. And
I remember when I was in high school, there was a girl who was a couple of years ahead of me who fancied herself a singer. And at a talent show, she sang It's Too Darn Hot. And people were scandalized because it was so sexy.
You know, do you know the show Of Thee I Sing?
Yeah, of course.
I love that show. And there was a girl that a family that went to our church, and we were pretty good friends with them. And there was a girl who was this very quiet, mousy type, you know, wore glasses from a young age, kind of, you know, never really all that pretty. And she played, I can't remember the name of the character, but like the vamp in that. And at our high school, and she didn't tell her parents, she didn't tell anybody. And everybody was like, oh Oh my gosh, where did that girl come from to do that? It was great. That's a great show. I'd love to do that show. That's a good show to do in a political year.
Has it been 5, Mary?
It is. It just turned to 5. Yep.
Great. Cheers, everybody.
Did Music Man at my school last fall, and we had to like cut out a bunch of shapoopy because it was just too like inappropriate. Apparently, we had to cut out a bunch of it, but it was a good show. It was really fun.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I remember years ago the Depot Theater over in Westport got an angry call because they were doing Damn Yankees. I've never said that word in my life, and I'm not going to hear it now. And she refused to come see Damn Yankees, which is pretty funny because it's a pretty innocent show, actually, all the way around. So you don't know. I mean, people have their, what's important to them, and you honor that and you move on. Okay, everybody. So we've been through these wonderful, crazy, insouciant times of the 1920s. Of course, it all comes to a crashing halt, literally, when the crash happens in 1929. The stock market crash hits, the Great Depression begins, and the 30s are characterized by the Depression. We see a very steep drop in theater attendance. Why? Nobody has any money. Nobody can pay $5 to come see a show anymore. And so there's now free entertainment. It's called radio. So everybody stays at home, tries to keep warm, tries to feed their families, and listen to the radio. And also, incidentally, this is when board games became popular. This is when Monopoly becomes popular. It's free. You can sit around and entertain your family, entertain yourself, but you cannot afford to go to Broadway. By, I think, 1932, 2/3 of all Broadway houses are closed. That's an amazing statistic. 2/3 of Broadway closes because of the Depression. That stat used to just stun me. But now I remind myself that right now, 100% of Broadway houses are closed. So there are real parallels here between, I think, what the industry went through and what all of America went through with the pandemic and with the Great Depression. Here I've got some pictures. Margaret Burke White, photos of people standing in line for food, the bread lines in New York City, just wrapped around blocks. And sort of frivolity, the frivolity of Broadway kind of dries up for a while, obviously. We can't just sing and dance our way through this particular problem. The Gershwins had a show or two shows on Broadway every year. And now there was no financing for those shows, so they had none. What happens to some of these great writers when there's no more Broadway? Where do they go? They head west, and they start writing for movies instead, for RKO, for MGM, for the Warner Brothers. So there's this great brain drain on Broadway, because if you can't make a living on Broadway, you go where the money is. So Rodgers and Hart, the Gershwins, Jerome Kern, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, they all head west, and they do some of their best writing for film and not for Broadway. I'm not dealing with Hollywood musicals at all. That's a whole different animal, but it occurs to me as I'm going through this, maybe a whole course on Hollywood musicals would be an interesting thing. They're put together in a completely different way, but they're still with us, and we'd have a lot of great footage. Anyway, so they all go away. Something interesting happens on Broadway when the Depression hits. In hard times, people tend to be a little more politicized than they would be in any other time. I mean, you don't have to be very political when it's the Roaring 20s and everything's great and the economy is going great and everything's wonderful and we must be doing something right. Suddenly the crash hits, people are starving, and people start to ask, how did this happen? Who made this happen? Things were going great. Who are these people on Wall Street that might have created this? Was it greed, buying on margin? What it was? And what kind of country are we when we cannot feed our people? And so a funny thing happens, and a headline said it well. The great white way turns a little red. It turns a little progressive. It turns a little socialist. It starts to speak in a very timely way. Let's put it this way. The Broadway musical suddenly becomes topical. For the first time, it's about what's happening right now, and it wants to talk in an honest way about what's going on in this country. So you start getting reviews on a whole bunch of things that are unique to this particular period, where Broadway seems to be literally ripped out of the headlines and gives us stuff to think about and to perhaps even urge us into action. There was a review in 1932 called Americana, music by E.Y. Harburg and Jay Gorney. Harburg, that name might be familiar because he paired with Harold Arlen to write something called The Wizard of Oz. So he was a great lyricist, but he was a very progressive activist his entire life. And in this review, Americana, we get what becomes the theme song of the Depression. And it's a song called Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? And let me tell you the background of Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? It's about the bonus army, that is the veterans from World War I, who when they came back after risking their lives, many of them maimed, wounded, they were given a small pension to live on. The Depression hits and the government simply stops paying their pension. And they're going to starve. They don't know what to do. They march on Washington. Does that sound familiar? They march on Washington. But when they get there, they are met by the US Army, which shoots guns at them and disperses them. The US Army shooting at US Army vets. The Depression can create conflicts like this. It was a national scandal. And this song is about those people who served. And it became the song of the decade. And recorded by everybody. Here we have Bing Crosby singing it in a later recording, but you'll get an idea of the song. This song, again, I love it when a song that appears on a Broadway show starts to speak to the nation in important ways. So Mary, let's hear Brother, Can You Spare a Dime?
They used to tell me I was building a dream, and so I followed the mob. When there was earth to plow or guns to bear, I was always there, right on the job. They used to tell me I was building a dream, with peace and glory ahead. Why should I be standing in line, just waiting for bread? Once I built a railroad, I made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once I built a tower up to the sun, brick and rivet and lime. Once I built a tower, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once in khaki suits, gee, we look swell, full of that Yankee doodly-dum. 500,000 boots went slogging through hell, and I was the kid with the drum.
Great. Hey, don't you remember they called me Al? It was Al all the time. Hey, don't you remember I'm your pal? Buddy, can you spare a dime? Going through this 1930 stuff this week, it's rather uncanny how there are certain parallels with what we're all going through right now with this pandemic. So Roosevelt introduced the New Deal. Among them are things like the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which we see a lot of evidence up this way of men were hired to live in camps and they planted pine trees and they built bridges. You see a lot of it in the Adirondacks. And also created something called the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, to employ people, much like we've just seen this COVID bill that's going to try to employ people again, to employ people, because the feeling is unless we keep people alive, we will have no industry left when this problem is over. And you might not have known, part of the WPA was called the Federal Theater Project, run by a woman named Haley Flanagan. And the idea of the Federal Theater Project is people realized if we don't keep actors and directors and composers and crew members alive during this, we won't have a Broadway to come back to. We're having that same argument today, by the way, that, you know, the theaters, and especially small nonprofit theaters, I happen to know about one, it's hard. It's very, very hard during this period. How are you going to keep the arts alive? How are you going to keep a symphony orchestra alive so it's there when we want it, when we're ready to go back into a theater? So this is the Federal Theater Project. It started doing excellent work. It employed at its height 12,500 people, mostly in New York City, and they were given $83 a month. And that was enough for them to live on. And it kept 12,500 people alive through the Depression. It was doing really excellent work, edgy work, but excellent work. It had a director, a young man named Orson Welles, who was putting up all of these wild, crazy things. He did an all-black Macbeth, for example, that everybody went crazy about. And they started doing different kinds of shows, but again, always topical. Again, the Broadway musical responding to what's happening in society. Here's a Federal Theater Project called 1/3 of a Nation. It comes from a statement by Roosevelt, who said, "I see 1/3 of a nation ill-housed, ill-clad, and ill-nourished." And here, literally, the songs, the sketches, the comedy routines are literally ripped from the newspapers. They would open a newspaper, they'd find a story, and then they'd write about it. And so this week, next week, the show keeps changing. We have an equivalent here today, and it's called Saturday Night Live. If there's the Democratic national debate, presidential debate on Friday, Saturday Night Live has a sketch about it, a rather withering sketch about it on Saturday night. This is the way, bringing what's happening in the world to a Broadway audience. A similar show was As Thousands Cheer. This had music by Irving Berlin. Again, ripped from the headline. The title comes from a rather, well, not strange, I guess, newspaper article in which a man who was so depressed by the Depression and so broke and so bankrupt, he was standing on the ledge of a high building and was going to jump. And it drew a huge crowd. And they started cheering. As thousands cheer, this man contemplates whether or not to end his life. So it had wonderful songs, and it had a wonderful song called Heat Wave. We're having a heat wave, a tropical heat wave, sung by Ethel Waters. That was the weather section of the newspaper. Somebody opened the newspaper and said, we're having a heat wave. And then they wrote a song and they wrote a sketch about it. This particular show had what is probably the most astonishing song ever on a Broadway stage. It was sung by Ethel Waters. Ethel Waters, once again, somebody I think is pretty much forgotten. You saw her a little bit on television in the 50s and 60s, a Black singer with a wonderful, warm voice, a wonderful actress. She, at one time, for a brief period, she was the highest paid performer on Broadway. Again, mostly forgotten today. But she sang a song that Irving Berlin wrote called Supper Time, which shocked New York City. It is a Black woman returning home to feed her family. It's supper time. But her husband was lynched that day. How do you go home and feed your family? What do you say to your family? This song, more than any article in a newspaper, brings lynching home to Northerners who might not even know it's happening. It is such a courageous song, and it is exquisitely sung by Ethel Waters. And I believe we've got some footage of her actually singing this song. Mary, when you're ready.
wall on the back of the theater was the first set. The entrance of Ethel Waters, this monumental woman had a bandana on her head. She had an apron on. The curtain closes behind her. Behind her was the silhouette of a man hanging from a tree with his head on the side, with the rope around his neck. We didn't know in those days about lynchings in the South.
It was very unbelievable that they did it in the first place, because you didn't bring in reality into a musical comedy or a review. It was unheard of.
She came forward with the beat of that orchestra, this funk of hers. Oh, and Aussprachen, and she went into it, and this woman went,
Supper time. I must set the table 'cause it's supper time. Somehow I ain't able 'cause that man of mine ain't coming home no more. Supper time. Kids will soon be yelling for their supper time. How'll I keep from telling them that man of mine?
If one song can tell the whole tragic history of a race, Supper Time was that song. In singing it, I was telling my comfortable, well-fed, well-dressed listeners about my people.
Isn't that extraordinary? It's an undeniable fact that sometimes a song can reach people better than a newspaper article, because somehow gets by our defenses, gets by our rationalizations, and just speaks to us very viscerally. And here we see the Broadway musical figuring that out and figuring that it has a social consciousness and starting to speak to real issues. We see that today. We see to this day the Broadway musical being progressive in a lot of ways, talking about gay issues before anybody else does it. You see the musical Fun Home or Falsettos, talking about racial issues. And we're going to see more of that as we go on, that the musical theater always in a very public national way grappled with issues that maybe certain people wish they didn't, but it did. And I'm going to tie this back to the Jewishness of many of the creators. Let us recall that they're immigrants here, and they're immigrants here because they're fleeing persecution and injustice in the Ukraine and in Eastern Europe. These people didn't want to come here necessarily, but they came here because of how terrible it was. And so they get here hoping for something better, and they realize around them there is still injustice, there's still unfairness. And so maybe it's not surprising that they bring a kind of progressive, it can't happen here, it shouldn't happen here, feeling to the Broadway musical. And again, I'm proud of it, and we have it to this day. So many musicals now are dealing with interesting, difficult subjects, still in wildly entertaining ways, with great lyrics and great music. But the musical, starting here, and we'll see more of it as we move on, isn't afraid to grapple with important social questions. That starts in the Depression, when the musical says it's not just song and dance anymore. We're an art form, and like any art form, we can begin to talk about serious things. One other story I'm going to tell, it's a great story. There was the most famous example, I think, is a federal theater project. Let me share my screen. Federal theater project called The Cradle Will Rock, written by Mark Blitzstein. It's an interesting story. Blitzstein is a composer. He'd spent some time with Bertolt Brecht, the communist director in Berlin, learned a lot about didactic theater, learned a lot about theater that should teach us something and not just entertain us. And he writes a musical called Cradle Will Rock. The plot, very simply, is Mr. Mister owns the steel mill. We see the first song is sung by a prostitute, somebody that the Depression has just stolen everything from her. So she has to use what she has, her body, to survive. And it makes a clear connection between the workers working for 50 cents a day, who are also prostitutes, in sort of thinking of this particular musical. It was incendiary. A young man named Orson Welles, who had been directing for the Fifth Theater Project, says, "We have to do this show. We have to, it is the show of the moment. We've got to do it." And so he's going to stage it. He's very excited about it. There is Mark Blitzstein himself with the cast of Cradle Will Rock. So they're preparing it. They've scheduled an opening on Broadway. They're very excited about it. Washington, D.C. hears of it and starts to really worry about it. It is a time of union agitation and union violence. Just before the show opens, there is union violence in Detroit and 7 people are killed. And the US government is very worried that this play, a Broadway musical, would incite a riot. So it's opening night. All of the actors arrive at the theater, the Maxine Elliott Theater, and the whole audience is there. They all arrive and the theater is padlocked. For the first time, the US government has censored a Broadway musical. Well, Orson Welles is the director and he's not going to let this happen. So he gets on the phone and he says, "We're going to find a theater, an empty theater somewhere. And we're going to, all of us, march to that theater. And we're going to do the show. We won't have any sets. We won't have any costumes, but we're going to do the show." And a theater is located, crummy, smelly, dirty theater, but it's 20 blocks north of the Maxine Elliott. So this is a scene I would have liked to have seen. The whole opening night audience, and it was a packed house, and all of the actors block 8th Avenue and go walking up 8th Avenue to this theater, determined to do this musical. So they get to this new theater, but by the time they get there, the US government has gotten to both the Actors Union and the Musicians Union. And they say, if anybody performs on that stage tonight, they will be kicked out of the union. And if they're kicked out of the union, they're kicked out of the Federal Theater Project, and they will not get their $83 a month. So the actors are saying to Orson Welles, "We can't go on. We simply cannot go on." He says, "Okay, Mark Blitzstein will just sit at a piano on stage. He'll do the whole thing himself." Blitzstein, not a performer. I don't think he's ever performed in front of human beings in his life. The audience fills the place. It is packed to the gills. He comes out, nervous as can be, sits down at the piano and starts to play The Cradle Will Rock. And he gets to the opening song, which is sung by a prostitute, and he starts to sing the first couple of lines. And then a woman in the 12th row stands up and starts singing the song. It is Olive Stanton, the woman who would be playing that role. And she starts singing it bravely. And then up in one of the boxes, somebody else stands up and starts singing. And then somebody in the balcony. They end up doing the whole show in the audience. Because the actors figured out, the rule said, if you perform on that stage, you will be kicked out of the union. But nobody can keep you from singing next to the person you're sitting next to in a theater. And so they start improvising this whole show and improvising blocking. And they're running around doing chase scenes through the audience. The audience is totally into it. And it turned out to be this riotous act of defiance. And it's called The Cradle Will Rock. It turned out to be a big hit. And they continued to do it mostly that way. They forgot about who needs sets and costumes. Let's just do this show, which teaches people about, in their view, how capitalism works. 4 years later, the director Orson Welles would direct something called Citizen Kane, right? But it's this kind of the outrageous kinds of things that Orson Welles absolutely loved. There was a film about this, a film called Cradle Will Rock, made by Tim Robbins. And if you're at all interested in this amazing footnote to the American musical, you can rent that film. It's called Cradle Will Rock. It's got an amazing cast. Susan Sarandon, John Cusack, Bill Murray, John Turturro, Vanessa Redgrave is in it. Hank Azaria, and a whole bunch more people you know. It's an odd film. It gets into vaudeville a little bit. It gets into Diego Rivera painting his murals at Rockefeller Center, which were destroyed because they were too political. But it's just a nice sort of snapshot of history. I show it to my students, but I don't know, you'd have to rent it or something, but I just recommend it. It's called The Cradle Will Rock. I'm going to move on to two, of course, very important people in American music. This is George and Ira Gershwin. George Gershwin, a genius in the pantheon of American music, will be remembered, I think, for three very different things. One is his concert work. He was a classical composer, and he composed Rhapsody in Blue and American in Paris and the Piano Concerto, all of which are performed by orchestras to this day. I think in any given year, there are 50 performances of Rhapsody in Blue by symphony orchestras around the world. Secondarily, he'll be remembered for his film scores. Remember, I said that when the Depression hit, all of the talent went to Hollywood. And here are the songs of Gershwin that you probably know. They Can't Take That Away From Me. The Way You Wear Your Hat, The Way You Sip Your Tea. The Memory of All That. No, they can't take that away from me. Let's Call the Whole Thing Off. You say either, and I say either. You say neither, and I say neither. Let's Call the Whole Thing Off. Our Love Is Here to Stay. Nice Work If You Can Get It. Just a whole bunch of really wonderful songs. Really, their very best work is done in film and not in theater. Finally, we'll know him for his theater music. Again, a lot of his early musicals with his brother Ira as lyricist. The books are kind of silly and they're just not done anymore. The songs are great. And twice, in my memory anyway, people have taken the songs and gotten permission to throw out the libretti, throw out the story, and they've written whole new musicals around the songs. So Tommy Tune did it in the 80s. Some of you might have seen this musical. It was called My One and Only, which was called the New Gershwin Musical. His songs, but whole new story. And that was an interesting, Debbie and I saw it. We really enjoyed it. It starred Tommy Tune and Twiggy. Do you remember Twiggy? She was the super thin model from the 1960s. Turns out she can sing or dance. More recently, Susan Stroman, who's an amazing dancer, choreographer, director, working in the theater today, took Girl Crazy, one of their earliest musicals, saved the music, rewrote the whole story, and came up with something called Crazy for You. And Crazy for You was an extremely successful musical with great dance numbers. But it's almost as if the only way you can do Gershwin is to rewrite Gershwin and save all the great songs. We talked already about how George got his start writing the song Swanee. Al Jolson discovers it, puts it into his own show. This is like 1919. And once it's in Jolson's show, it sells 2 million records in 1919, 1920, and it sells 1 million pieces of music. So Gershwin has arrived. I want to talk briefly, just because it's so unbelievable, about a musical that he and Ira wrote in 1924 called Lady Be Good. You might know the title number. Conventional musical, dazzling score, but there are several things that are fascinating about this particular musical. In the first place, it starred these two people. I don't know if you know these two people. This is Fred Astaire and his sister, Adele. Fred and Adele Astaire were a great dance team. They really caught on to this whole social dance phenomenon, and they essentially were teaching the nation and the world how to dance. She was a little tired of show business, but she was game and she was a wonderful dancer, and they had a great career. When they were doing Lady Be Good, there was a 19-year-old girl who had a secondary role, Virginia McGrath, who changed her name to Ginger Rogers. And the producer comes to Fred Astaire saying, the girl needs a dance number. She dances very well. Would you deign to sort of choreograph a number for Ginger Rogers? And that is where Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers meet, become a team. Adele is very anxious, his sister, to get out of show business. And so, of course, they become Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, the most famous dance team in film. They make 10 films together, most of them for RKO. RKO is interesting. You know what RKO stands for? It stands for Radio Keith Orpheum. Remember the Keith and the Orpheum were vaudeville circuits? When vaudeville was dying, they joined together. And with RCA, that whole sort of vaudeville apparatus goes to Hollywood and starts making musicals under the title RKO. It also starred an 18-year-old girl. And once again, we see Ethel Merman. Ethel Merman is going to keep popping up. She's just going to keep popping up. She's in so many shows. She's so popular, and everybody loves her. Gershwin, the first time he meets her, says, "Never take a singing lesson. Never let a voice teacher get close to you, because how you sing is unique, and just continue to do that." George Gershwin was a musical genius, and we actually have a little bit of a video of him playing "I've Got Rhythm." Look at how this man plays the piano. Mary, when you're ready. Amazing, yes? I call that sort of Rachmaninoff meets Scott Joplin, right? Here's a man who has the dexterity and the brilliance of Rachmaninoff on the keyboard, but he also hears black music, and is that perfect coming together of classical music and black musical styles that we get in George Gershwin. And we get in something like Rhapsody in Blue. I want to talk about Ira's contribution as a lyricist. Again, we're talking a lot about lyricists today. They often get short shrift. We've talked about Lawrence Hart. We've talked about Cole Porter. The third in that triumvirate in this period is Ira Gershwin. Ira's contribution is that he hears American slang. We as Americans started talking in different ways, in different slangy ways. And he loved it, and he had an ear for it. So he would hear somebody say, "Well, nice work if you can get it." And he'd think, that would make an unusual love song. Nice work if you can get it. Or he'd hear somebody say, look, let's just call the whole thing off, right? Very American way of saying that. He would take those kind of slangy phrases and turn them into song. A critic as early as 1925 said, "The words are typically American, using American words and phrases that are so much better than the stilted artificiality of operetta." Right? So we get somebody who really understands American speech. And I'm going to read to you my favorite lyric by Ira Gershwin. He noticed that we often, as Americans, don't say entire words. We kind of allied them together. So, what do you think? It's intermission. What do you think of the musical? It's wonderful. It's wonderful. We don't say it's wonderful. We go, it's wonderful. It's marvelous. It's terrific. He also noticed that often, especially at the time he was writing this particular song in 27, there was a fad for not finishing words, for not saying the entire word. That was kind of cool. So you get this remarkable lyric to a song called "Swonderful." Okay, nobody else had the cleverness to write this lyric. "Swonderful, smarvelous, you should care for me. Sawful nice, 's paradise, 's what I love to see. You've made my life so glamorous. You can't blame me for feeling amorous. Oh, swonderful, marvelous, you should care for me." And here's this brilliant bridge. Don't mind telling you, in my humble fash, thrill me through and through with a tender pash. When you said you cared, imagine my emotion. You swore then and there, permanent devotion. You made all other men seem blah. You and you alone filled me with, ah, it's wonderful, it's marvelous. Isn't that marvelous? It goes on and on. What cleverness. And there's such cleverness. There are books actually published of just Ira Gershwin's lyrics. They're so beautiful, so apt, but just so American, you know? And he would hate it when he would go into a club, a cabaret or something, and the singer would be somebody like Sammy Davis Jr., and he would go, oh, Ira Gershwin is here. I'll sing one of his songs. It's wonderful. It's marvelous. And he would go, no, that's not what the song is about. The song is about, we don't say it's, we go, wonderful. Don't you understand? Anyway, I think it's a brilliant song and a great example of the work of Ira Gershwin. Again, we don't do many of their musicals except for one. And is it a musical? It's written in 1935 and it's called Porgy and Bess. A landmark, really, in American musical theater. It is a plot about, it's based on a novel by DuBose Hayward. It's about the poverty-stricken Black residents in a place called Catfish Row. Gershwin is really taken by it. Again, it's a risky endeavor. Is anybody going to come see this? It's going to need an all-black cast, almost a completely all-black cast. He spends a year writing the music and another year writing the orchestrations. And that's interesting because even Stephen Sondheim doesn't write his own orchestrations. You write out a piano score, and then Sondheim gives it to a man named Jonathan Tunick, and he writes the orchestrations. But Gershwin is trying to write a new American opera. He wants to be like Verdi. He wants to be like Puccini. They wrote their orchestrations. He's going to. So he spent 2 years on the music and the orchestrations. The question is it an opera or is it a musical? And people are still divided on that. Opening night of Porgy and Bess, How You Wish You Were There, the audience cheered for half an hour. They stood on their feet and cheered for half an hour over this musical. But the reviews were mixed. And they were mixed because Gershwin did what Verdi does, what Puccini does, and that is he set all of the dialogue to music, recitative, or what we call recits, right? Many of you who don't like opera is because you wish they would just get to the big arias and not sing all of that dialogue and tell all that story. Can we just get to, Nessun Dorma? Do we really have to have all of that conversation set to music? Well, Gershwin did this because he wanted to prove there could be an American opera. So it made the opera very long and is generally considered that the musical writing for all of the recitative is not as good as the rest. I mean, you've got amazing numbers. I've got plenty of nuttin', and it ain't necessarily so. And Bess You Is My Woman Now, and Summertime. You've got all these great songs connected with maybe not so great recitative. So one reviewer, Brooks Atkinson, says, why commonplace remarks that carry no emotion have to be made in a chanting monotone is a problem I cannot fathom. As I say, it opens in 1935. It plays for 15 weeks on Broadway. If it's an opera, that's a runaway success. If it's a musical, it's a failure, right? What happens is that when it's revived many years later, all of the recitative is just turned back into dialogue. And so we just have the musical numbers. In other words, it's turned from an opera into a musical theater piece. And then it's a huge success. And for many decades, the Porgy and Bess that we have is the musical theater version, which threw out pages and pages and pages of Gershwin writing, but we still have all of the great songs. Not until 1975 was the thing recorded as it was originally written, with all of the musical recitative. It was done by Lauren Mazel, by the Cleveland Orchestra. Kate Gridley, do you know who sang Sport and Life in that? A man named Francois Clemens. Francois Clemens, a local star here in Middlebury, if you're not in Middlebury, and beloved figure. He is the first Sport and Life to actually be recorded, singing the entire score for Kate, do you have something to add? Okay.
It's just, they got a Grammy. They got a Grammy for that.
They got a Grammy for it. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Today, it's generally
Doug,
by opera company.
Doug, one other quick thing. David Clark just shared with me that a Grammy was won by Porgy and Bess just in 2021, but I don't know who it was.
It was the Metropolitan Opera version.
It was the Metropolitan Opera version.
The Met Opera just redid it in the full version with all of the rest. It's musicalized. You could not get a ticket. You could simply not get a ticket to it, and it won a Grammy Award. It's a very powerful thing, and of course, all of the arias, you probably know that. We have some footage about Porgy and Bess right now, and some of it starring the great Dorothea Dandridge singing Supper Time. So let's just play a little bit of Porgy and Bess for y'all.
Oh, I got plenty of nothing, and nothing's plenty for me. I got my gal, I got my son, I got him all day long. Oh, there's no use complaining. Ha! Got my gal, I got my Lord, I got my son.
Under the direction of Reuben Mamoulian, and with Ira Gershwin providing lyrics for songs like It Ain't Necessarily So, the production opened at the Alvin Theatre on October 10th, 1935, to an audience that included both drama and music critics.
John Mason Brown, New York Evening Post. It is a Russian who has directed it, 2 Southerners who have written its book, 2 Jewish boys who have composed its lyrics and music, and a stage full of Negroes who sing and act it to perfection. The result is one of the far-famed wonders of the melting pot. The most American opera that has yet been seen or heard.
That's a folk opera. That's an absolute opera, as far as I'm concerned. And when it's done on Broadway, it's a Broadway show. This is my favorite. I mean, you know, that's. I think there's Porgy, and then I think there's everything else. DuBose Hayward's lyrics are the best lyrics ever written, I think, for the musical stage. They're true poetry, but the music doesn't overblow them, and it only enriches them, and they enrich the music too. My man's gone now. Summertime. Genuinely poetic.
That works. Scott, you might agree with me. I think the choral writing in this piece is just absolutely exceptional. You know, brings tears to my eyes. It must be said briefly that both Showboat and Porgy and Bess to this day create controversy. And you just have to say it out loud. These are white men in both cases, you know, Jerome Kern, Oscar Hammerstein, Ira Gershwin, George Gershwin, creating representations of Black life. And it is controversial. Showboat especially, if you're going to do Showboat, you better do some community outreach and bring Black representatives into that conversation, because Showboat, there's a kind of happy-go-lucky Black character in it that is offensive, that today is seen as offensive by some people. Porgy too. Porgy, of course, though it was is mostly done by opera companies, gets a little bit of a pass because virtually every opera is offensive to somebody. Do Madame Butterfly, do Turandot. Opera sort of made up culture as it went along and wasn't too particular about being really faithful to what's happening in Japan, say at that time. But still, I think the Met did a very, very good job creating a conversation, the Metropolitan Opera, about their recent production of Porgy and Bess, and it was absolutely loved. Okay, we're going to rush into the 1940s here. Stay with me; it gets interesting. It's already been fascinating, I know, but it's more interesting now. I want to talk about the musical during war. In the 1940s, of course, everything changes because we get ourselves out of a depression because we're at war. Suddenly all the munitions factories have to start up. Suddenly mostly men leave for the war. The women have to go in, Rosie the Riveter, all of these kinds of stories. But suddenly our economy goes into overdrive because we're at war. And so for the second time, I think a world war changes the course of Broadway in a big way. I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about how Broadway has always responded very strongly to America being at war. And I'm going to go back just briefly to World War I. I don't think we recall that there was a good percentage of this country wanted nothing to do with World War I. Why should we go there? The Europeans are having this spat. Leave us out of that. We've just won the Spanish-American War. We are powerful. We are strong. Why should we send our boys over to Europe? And so you get songs written like, I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. We want nothing to do with this. Enter George M. Cohan. I haven't talked much about George M. Cohan. I should. He's important, writing between, say, 1900 and 1925. He, as a composer and in the way he presented himself on Broadway, was the all-American composer. He wrote songs like Yankee Doodle Dandy and You're a Grand Old Flag, right? And he would like nothing better after a performance to drape himself in an American flag and walk to the footlights and sing a patriotic song. He told everybody he was born on the 4th of July. He was born on the 5th of July, but we'll give him that. We'll give him July 4th as his birthday, okay? He gets on a train in New Rochelle, where he lives, only 45 minutes from Broadway. And he opens his newspaper and it says America has joined the war. By the time he gets to Grand Central Station, he has written a song that some people think changed the course of the war. And it was a song called Over There. It was a song which urged Americans to get behind the war. Do you know this song? Over there, spread the word over there. 'Cause the Yanks are coming, they're drumming everywhere. It's a brilliant song. It's brilliant for reasons, if you know the song, you probably never realized just how brilliant it is. What is this? That's reveille. That's what the bugle boy blows in the morning to get the soldiers out of bed to go fight the war. So he incorporates that into this song. He's playing reveille for all of America. Get out of bed. We've got work to do. It's actually a kind of a genius composition. This song takes off. Again, there's a way in which a song sometimes bypasses all of our defenses and stirs up our patriotism and our emotions. This song is credited by many people with changing American feelings about the war. It sells 2 million copies by the end of the war. And George M. Cohan, who played Town Hall Theater as a young boy, by the way, on a vaudeville circuit, George M. Cohan wins the Congressional Medal of Honor. Again, don't tell me that Broadway composers and the Broadway stage doesn't speak directly to the American public. This is a very important song, and it was written by a Broadway composer. Ditto with a guy whom I love, who, again, I haven't talked enough about, Irving Berlin. We'll try to find way. Irving Berlin had 899 songs published in his lifetime. 500 of them are standards. He's a fascinating character. Songs like Alexander's Ragtime Band, Always, Anything You Can Do, I Can Do, just a million songs. I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas and Easter Parade. It's interesting that the two most famous songs about Christian holidays were written by this little Jewish boy. But it is simple. It is a simple fact. Anyway, he's drafted during World War II. And he can't do anything. I mean, he's a little schlemiel. He can't shoot. He can't do. And he's on Long Island at Camp Upton in Yaphank, Long Island. And he's like, I got an idea, Sarge. I've been meeting all of these. The soldiers came to New York, the New York area, from all across the country to go off to the war, World War II. He said, and I've learned that some of them are great singers and dancers and comics. And why don't I write a review? Berlin, of course, wrote reviews. He wrote for Ziegfeld. Why don't I write a review called Yip Yip Yap Hank, and we'll raise money for the war? And they're like, great. So Irving Berlin puts together this on the camp of Camp Upton, this musical review. Well, of course, all of New York comes to see it. Every critic comes to see it. And it is so good, it transfers to Broadway. So it's playing the Lexington Theater on Broadway. All of these servicemen and women who will soon be going off to the war find themselves on Broadway doing this great show by Irving Berlin. That's in World War I. It had what was undoubtedly the greatest finale ever on one night of a Broadway stage presentation. A sergeant or somebody comes out on stage and says to the audience, there are 150, 200 soldiers on stage. He says, I just want you to know that tonight they will leave this theater and get on the transport and get on the boat and go off to the war. Tonight. So they sang the finale and marched up the aisles with the audience applauding and weeping, knowing that they're going to war tonight and many of them will never come back. That's a finale and a half. In World War II, the show was so famous that it was revived, this time with a cast of 300 soldiers on stage, and they called it This Is the Army. And again, it was all soldiers. Of course, they all congregated in New York, again, before they went off to war. And this was turned into a film starring what would be the 40th president of the United States, Ronald Reagan, is in the film This Is the Army. And I want to show it to you because it shows this finale, tries to recreate, it recreates in a wonderful way. There are 300, at least, servicemen in this Broadway musical doing this show. And we're going to show you the finale in the film. Again, what happens in films is generally a little more elaborate, a little larger, a little crazier than we would have seen on a Broadway stage in 1943. But still, this is the feeling of what it created. And again, I just want to point out that when Broadway had to step up and support the war, World War I, World War II, it did so in a big way. I think you're going to enjoy this. Mary.
Put the men at rest, Sergeant. Parade! Rest! Ladies and gentlemen, it is with regret and pride that I make this announcement to you, to the members of the cast, and to their families. This is the final performance of your soldier show. In a few minutes, when the curtain comes down for the last time, the men will be ordered back to their combat units. Men, you have done a great job for a great cause.
Was not so long ago, we sailed to meet the foe, and thought our fighting days were done. We thought 'twas over then, but now we're in again, to win the war that wasn't won. This time we will all make certain that this time is the last time. This time we will not say curtain till we ring it down in our own hometown. For this time we
pretty remarkable, I think. I get chills watching that. I honestly do. And of course, many of those men in the real production never came back. And the audience knew that would be the case. Stay with me. I got a little more to talk about. And now we're going to get to what I think is the most famous wartime musical of all, and one of the greatest musicals of all time. And you've probably never thought of it as a wartime musical. And it's called Oklahoma, which debuts in 1943. I don't know if you ever thought of it as a wartime musical, but let's talk a little bit. What was Times Square like in 1943? Who was there? It was all servicemen and women, right? They've come from all over the country. They've come to Times Square, and then they're going to be shipped out in 2 or 3 days. They get their guns, they get their training, and then they go off to war, and many of them never come back. New York City bends over backwards for the servicemen and women. They get free food at restaurants. The stage door canteen gives them entertainment, top flight entertainment. And they're given free tickets to Broadway shows. The one they liked the most was Oklahoma. And there are stories of rows and rows and rows of servicemen and women watching Oklahoma and sobbing their eyes out. Why? What is Oklahoma? What is Oklahoma in 1943? It's the heart of the country. It's manifest destiny. I like to say, this musical isn't called Rhode Island. It isn't called Delaware. It's called Oklahoma. That, to quote Willa Cather, not a country, but the stuff that countries are made of. And servicemen and women got that. They got that this is what they were fighting for. And there are several ways that you've probably never noticed, because my feeling is if Oklahoma opened in 1935, it would have failed. And if it opened in 1955, it would have failed. It opened at exactly the right place to, strike a chord with the American public. There are several aspects of it which very clearly help an audience identify with what they were going through. In the first place, it's about one inconceivably evil man who's going to wreck our society. It is Judd, right? We don't know why he's as evil as he is. It doesn't matter. But he's going to rip this community apart. What do we have to do? We have to get together and work together. And there's a key number in this song, which many people think of as a throwaway number. It's called "The Farmer and the Cowhand Must Be Friends," right? The farmer wants to put up fences in Oklahoma so his crops and his farm is protected. The cowhand wants no fences so he can graze his herd. Don't fence me in, right? And so they were at odds with each other. And Eller gets them together at the top of Act 2 and sings this amazing song. Look, I don't care how much we disagree. If we don't work together, we're never going to overcome this single man who could destroy us all. And in a wonderful kind of metaphoric way, she literally gets the farmers and the cowhands to dance together. And it is a picture of national unity in 1943. And then there's a key scene, again, it's brief, it's often overlooked in Act 2, where Laurie is having a breakdown. She's supposed to get married, it's completely ripped apart. She doesn't know where Curly is, and she's in her bedroom breaking down. She's lost her man. And Aunt Eller comes into the bedroom and yells at her. She says, "Is this helping? You've lost your man. Is this helping? Do you think he wants you to break down right now? He doesn't. You've got to be strong." And she says a very important line. She says, "You've got to be hardy." We Americans, that spoke to every spouse in the country whose husband or wife was going off to war. I know my father didn't see my sister until she was 19 months old, It was very hard emotionally on everybody left behind. And this musical says that we've got to work together and we've got to be hardy, and we will somehow overcome this. It's a curious musical. It's a little long. They sing Oklahoma in the second act and you grab your coat, you think it's over. No, there's another 25 minutes of Oklahoma. But it was extraordinary. And Oscar Hammerstein, who wrote Showboat, the two tent poles of musicals to this point are Showboat and Oklahoma. And they're both written by the same guy, Oscar Hammerstein II. It's absolutely extraordinary. And here he kind of does away. Somebody said he didn't rewrite the rules of the American musical. He kind of threw them away and created his own. Do you know the opening number of Oklahoma? Are there dancing girls in skirts? No. The curtain goes up on a woman churning butter. What? Yeah, exactly. And then the opening number is not sung by the chorus. It's sung by one man, and he starts singing off stage. That had never been done before. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. And he comes on stage. An opening number sung by one person? No, opening numbers are supposed to get us in the mood, and you got the dancing girls and the kick lines. No, there's a simplicity and a directness to the writing of Hammerstein here. And he takes his time to create character. What's the plot of the first act of Oklahoma? Who gets to take who to a dance? That's it. That's it. So he slows down and writes songs about character, songs that take us deeper into character. It's brand new. He also does something that you probably know about. He incorporates dance as a way to tell a story. And these are the dances by Agnes de Mille, especially Laurie's Dream at the end of Act 1, where Oscar Hammerstein thought there would be like a tap dance or something, just some fun thing to end the act. He said, and Agnes de Mille says, no, we got to get into her head. And so we get this very impressionistic, expressionistic dream of hers about all the terror she's going through because of what the havoc Judd is wreaking on his life. There had never been anything like it. I got to read the greatest 6-word review of all time. Walter, of course, it first, if we talked about out-of-town tryouts, you never opened a musical on Broadway. It's too dangerous. So you would do an out-of-town tryout away from the critics to work it through and get it right. So you went to New Haven or Boston or Baltimore or Washington, D.C., and there would be the latest Broadway musical, but they're still working it out. It's too long. They're adding songs. They're dropping songs. This show goes to New Haven. And Walter Winchell, the famous columnist, sends, the columnists are not supposed to go to an out-of-town tryout. You're not, because no producer wants somebody to leak back to the press, oh, it's terrible, it's horrible. You're still working on it. But Winchell sent his secretary, and she wrote back this 6-word review: no legs, no jokes, no chance. It's a great review. No legs, no dance. Where are the girls? Where are the girls in scanty clothes? Where's that spectacle? Where's the humor? Where's the jokes? No, none of it. She thought it did not have a chance in the world. Well, again, I tell you, servicemen and women come to see it. They're sobbing. Everybody's sobbing. The New York Fire Department has to break their rules and let let servicemen and women stand in the wings and backstage. Often the actors had to fight their way through service people just to make an entrance, just to come on stage. It plays for 5 years. It sets the record of 2,212 performances. The earlier record had been 1,400, so it doubled the amount of performances any show had ever had. There's a funny story about Hammerstein's tenant farmer. He lived in Bucks County, and he had a tenant farmer. And the tenant, and you just couldn't get a ticket for, you just couldn't get a ticket. And the tenant farmer says to Oscar Hammerstein, if he could get tickets for his son's wedding. And Hammerstein says, when's the wedding? And the farmer says, whenever you can get tickets. It's that popular and that groundbreaking a show. So we've got some clips, Mary. We've got a clip about this to show.
Do you want to show those couple of images, or just go right to the clip?
Let's see. I don't think so. That's the original production. Never mind. Let's just go straight to I'm running a little over, so let's go.
When Oklahoma opened at the St. James Theater, the United States had been at war for 16 months. With empty seats to fill, the cast offered free tickets to coax U.S. servicemen into the theater. The GI's emotional response to the show hinted at the enormous success that was to come.
Everybody who came to that show, all the soldiers, went overseas for the duration. And I remember so well that triple row of uniforms at the back. The men watching this folksy show, happy, light, with the tears streaming down their cheeks. because it symbolized home and what they were going to die for.
There wasn't another empty seat for years. Not only was Oklahoma the hottest ticket on Broadway, but it led to a best-selling cast album that brought the original performances into living rooms across the nation.
And when we sang, we're only saying, "Lord, doing fine."
Oklahoma played for 5 solid years, breaking the record for the longest-running musical by over 800 performances. There are now over 600 productions, amateur and professional, in the United States each year. On any given day, 2 separate performances of Oklahoma are likely to be playing somewhere in America.
That's originally John Raitt as Curly. You saw some glimpses of him there. Bonnie Raitt, if you know Bonnie Raitt, the musician, her father. And then it's Gordon McRae in the film. We could not find online the complete film, but we did find online for you the opening number, again, the film version, and Laurie's Dream. And I highly recommend them both, especially the opening number. Gordon McRae, it is the essence of simplicity, him coming out and singing that song. It's unlike any other opening of any other musical, and it sets the tone beautifully. Okay, guys, let me talk a little bit about what's coming up. Rodgers and Hammerstein begin to now create a template and set a bar for the American musical that leads to what is thought of as the golden age of the American musical. And this is where
And
we're
I'll
going
just
to
say, this is actually class 3 that you're previewing, right?
I'm previewing class 3. I just didn't type it that way, Mary. Thank
Okay.
you for that. It is class 3. And so we start to see South Pacific, and we start to see My Fair Lady, and we start to see Guys and Dolls, and we start to see all of the musicals now that we think of as kind of the mother lode of the American musical. These are the musicals that are still revived. And they all have a kind of, I'm going to use the word template. It's not quite right, but a way of thinking about the musical that congeals, an integrated musical where the songs help tell the story. So we'll have a great time next time looking at a lot of footage of the Golden Age. We'll look at Rodgers and Hammerstein, and Hammerstein continues to write extraordinary musicals, Carousel being one of them. We'll look at Lerner and Loewe, who write My Fair Lady. We'll look at West Side Story, which is another musical that I think changes everything, and one of the 5 or 6 greatest musicals ever written by Bernstein. We'll look a little at the 1960s. We'll look at rock and roll and amplification and how the musical changes in a major way in the 1960s. And we'll look at some formal experiments that turned out to be some of the best musicals ever written, Cabaret and A Chorus Line and Stephen Sondheim's Company, which is a very important musical. So we'll now be able to get more and more visual stuff because we're getting into the period of television and film. And so that's all I have to say, ladies and gentlemen. I have so much fun talking about this stuff. And thank you for staying with me. Let me turn this. And we'll see you next week. Thank you very much.
Great. And I'll just remind everybody, watch your email tomorrow for an email from Lisa Mitchell of Town Hall Theater, where this recording from tonight will be available, as well as a reminder of the link to all of the great YouTubes you can watch that Doug has mentioned, and a whole bunch more. So thanks for all being here. It's been great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Speaking as somebody who grew up in Oklahoma, that play is like our national anthem.
Yeah.
Sure it is.
And there are many, many productions every year in Oklahoma. I mean, it just never stops.
Well, it's the state song. Oklahoma is the state song now. And the wind will sweep down the plain.
I'm pretty sure Rodgers and Hammerstein never went to Oklahoma.
No, they didn't, but they based it on a book by Lynn Riggs, who was an Oklahoman. Raise the grass.
Green Grow the Lilacs, wasn't that?
Green Grow the Lilacs.
Yeah,
That's a real catchy title.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's too funny.
If anybody's interested, there is a production of Oklahoma put together by the North Carolina School of the Arts, where they created Oklahoma using the template of the original costumes and blocking and dance and everything, all put on by students. An excellent production, and it just gives the flavor of 1943 as opposed to what you see now, or that the latest Oklahoma, which was on Broadway, which was done in a very interesting and different way.
Yeah.
Anyway, that thing is available on YouTube, the North Carolina School for the Arts production.
And actually, thank you for saying that, Ed, because I actually am planning to include that in the list.
Oh,
Because
good.
I found it when I was looking for the film version, and I looked at some of it and I was quite impressed with it. So that'll be on your list tomorrow.
The performers are young. North Carolina School of the Arts is one of the premier theater training schools in the country. In fact, you can actually start going there as a high school student. So the performers are young, but you're right. It's as close to kind of authentic as you would get. I am partial to the film version, which I think is pretty faithful, and parts of it actually feel a little more like a stage production. So if you can find it or rent it or something, that would be a good thing to do.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Here we go.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Doug.
Really appreciate it.
Good job. Bravo.
Good.
Is that a dog?
Yes, sorry.
Whose dog is that?
Lynn, it's Lynn Perkinen. My dog wants to go out.
No, I love it.
So sorry.
Feature him. Wait. Night, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
No, you gotta be quiet.
Go out too.
We're all still getting the hang of the Zoom business.
Hey, buddy, come on.
Oh, my sister left. Okay.
I know, you asked her to stay this time.
I know, I kind of wish
Oh,
you
well.
Sorry. Gosh.
Thanks, Mary. Thought that went pretty well, pretty smoothly.
Yeah, it was great. I'm just trying to encourage some folks to exit. I forgot to mention that in my intro.
Cups on the floor.
Oh, great.
Is there anybody still? I got rid of them all.
There they are.
Okay.
Great.
Shoot. So those 5 people are in the waiting room and they'll be sitting there until I end the meeting. Oh, let me stop the recording. Yep. Okay.